So welcome everyone. My name is Cindy Kraft. I'm an owner here at K&K Healthcare Solutions. My fellow owner, Sherry Teague, is also with us today. She's behind the scenes a bit and will be managing some of the technical aspects as well as the chat box. But I want to welcome each and every one of you to today's session, whether you're participating live or listening to a recorded version, all are welcome because Sherry and I are super excited about our idea, and we're optimistic that others will see kind of the method to our madness when it comes to considering maybe a different way to approach OASIS education. We know that there has been the traditional model, the current state, and I want to be very clear. Many of you know that I have been in this OASIS education space for more than 2 decades. And so I very much relate to current state. The idea that it's going to be a long session, it might be a whole day, some of them stretch into 2 days. We know that it can get costly for people to be able to participate, so they have to limit the number of people that they send. Even as technology has advanced and things are more on demand, whether they're video training or webinars, it still can become a quite time-consuming effort to do that. And a lot of that between the time and dime leads to agencies sending a smaller group of individuals to one of these events, whether it's an in-person training or a series of webinars. Let's have a few people listen, and then they can take that information and do the infamous train the trainer. We also know that a lot of these sessions are set up, and again, guilty as charged, the sage on a stage model, where this one person, or maybe two people, are supposed to be the experts in this conversation, and then everyone assembles, whether in person or virtually, and listens to them proclaim their information. Again, guilty as charged, but I'm beginning to wonder if this model is actually as effective as it should be, because it also can get very repetitive, especially when we don't have major OASIS changes. We know that whenever they change a letter, then it becomes, oh my gosh, what is different? And we have to go through it and we have to figure out what the new pieces are, and new questions get all kinds of attention because we want to make sure everybody's prepared. But then even the conversion from E to E1 was like, oh no, there's a new number, but there really wasn't new. There was only one brand new question and a couple modifications that were actually positives, and then a couple questions that went away. And now we know 2025 is not going to have any more OASIS changes, and we don't anticipate any changes to items in 26. There'll be discussions about what they want to change for a variety of reasons, but those wouldn't go live until January 1 of 27. So that also puts us in kind of an OASIS no man's land, kind of a, how do we keep this information current? Because we know, especially that current state model, there is absolutely a time and a place for that. And that is typically for individuals new to this setting, new to OASIS, not really understanding what's going on. And I refer to that as soup to nuts training. That person needs to understand not just each of the items, but what's important about those items and the big picture of those items. And yes, that is going to consume time and dime to be done correctly. But we have a good portion of this industry that is well seasoned, whether it's clinicians out there collecting the data, or review staff in the organization, or outsourced providers like K&K, or people that are tasked with doing education. And it's kind of a been there, done that. These questions aren't that much different than they have been. But then if they haven't changed that much, why do we still see so many corrections? Why do we still see so much back and forth between the clinician and the reviewer, especially around my personal favorite, the functional assessment, where the M1800s have been virtually unchanged in more than 20 years, and yet that still is the primary focus when it comes to corrections and trying to remediate and get people all on the same page. So I guess I reached a point in talking with Sherry, it was like, you know what? This has been there, done that. Can we try something else? And a lot of this came from looking at a variety of the products K&K has and say, you know what, we think they're good, but what if we took bits and pieces of each one and put it together around the OASIS in more of a interactive, engaging exchange of information, more like a club. And club kind of fit, if you read the marketing material Sherry was putting out. Club OASIS kind of felt like this should be, you know, a beach and a cocktail. We know that that term does not make people usually think happy thoughts, but we want to be able to flip that script and do it different. So we talk about it in terms of a once a quarter 60-minute session that will be done live and will be recorded. So if that particular date and time does not work for you, you don't miss anything. It's going to be recorded. We wanted to manage that price differently, and you'll see that by the time we're done today, how we've structured the pricing is really what I'm going to call the more the merrier. The more individuals that want to participate from your agency, the pricing actually goes down significantly. Because really, my dream, we want information to be accessible to clinicians. I think part of the reason clinicians are very frustrated about the OASIS is it's discipline neutral data collection. It is not clinical in any of its reasonings. It sometimes uses clinical words, but it's nothing more than data collection, and very often it's incomplete thoughts. And we've also added this level of mystery, like it's too hard for them to understand. I've heard people even say that it's just too complicated. So you mean to tell me nurses that do all the math involved with setting up IVs that could literally kill somebody if it's wrong can't figure out how to fill this form? Therapists with advanced degrees can't figure this out? I think we've made it too mystical. We want to get this information in practical terms directly down to the clinician, either them by participating in this club or by putting tools and resources in the hands of the people trying to support them to break this cycle of, isn't it horrible? We have to fill this thing out. To that end, we want it to also have an interactive component. So today may not feel as interactive, but I'm going to explain how it's going to work in the sessions going forward. And by making it a quarterly club meeting, we want to keep it new and flexible. So if something starts to arise, we start seeing on our business side that there's a lot more corrections in a particular area, or a club member says, listen, I'm pulling my hair out over this one particular issue. Can we put that on the docket? I want that to be a possibility. So it's not 4 canned presentations a year. It really allows people to be active participants. So I want to make each one of these sessions into 4 elements, okay? One, the CMS Q&As, which is why we're looking to time them not too far after when CMS typically drops the Q&As. Not so that I can read them to you. They're freely accessible whenever they drop. You can pull them down. The clinicians can pull them down. Anybody, you don't even have to work in home care. You can pull them down and read them if you want. I don't want to read them to you. What I want to use them for is to say, make sure there's just a couple nuance pieces that you want to pay attention to. And you want to make sure the people in the organization know this, because it can get very easy to say, well, we're going to assign this person to stay on top of the Q&As, but more often than not, these folks have other responsibilities. Yes, I see you out there. The ones that are, I'm supposed to do education, I'm supposed to stay on top of the Q&As, I'm supposed to do the, oh, and I got to go to these meetings, and then, oh, wait a minute, then I got to go see patients because we're short-staffed. I mean to just disperse the information, I just run out of time. This will help to expedite it. What are those ones we want to be paying attention to in particular from the Q&As? Then we have products at K&K that I refer to as knowledge assessments because I don't like the word test. It has a connotation of pass fail or you get a certificate or all of this. No, I want to utilize scenario-based questions to help us get to what do we know and what don't we know. So perfection is not necessarily the goal. I mean, it's the ultimate goal that every time we get asked scenario-based questions, we get them right. But if we don't, then how do we close those gaps? So I'm going to explain that a little bit more by demonstrating some questions in a few minutes. Then educational content. We want to take a few minutes of each of those sessions to focus on what are those hot button issues that we're hearing? What are those questions that are causing aggravation? And are there some of them that I want to add? Because I want to make sure we don't forget. Because we can become hyper fixated on certain things, like the GGs right now. Oh man, they're in value-based purchasing. I got to make sure everybody knows those. But there's other issues. All of the questions have some sort of weight, either directly or indirectly, into payment, into outcomes, into value-based purchasing. So we can't let other stuff slide. So we want to use this club to say, let's not forget about, or here's a reminder about, to make sure we don't lose those things. And then the fourth component is open Q&A. Now, some of you participate in the free Q&As that Sherry and I do every other month. And what's been interesting with those, not only do we get a lot of discussion about OASIS, but feedback about how much people enjoy it because it feels like it's more casual, it's more discussion. It's also saying if you ask a question we don't know, we're not going to make it up. We'll go look it up and help you find it. But we want to have that element in this club as well. So I want to demonstrate part of it. It's one thing. I didn't want to do a little, let's just do a marketing slick and let's lay out. I want to I wanted people to be able to experience what we're trying to do with this. So I pulled the January Q&As to say, what are some things we need to pay attention to? Well, a lot of that discussion in the Q&As and a lot of discussion with CMS has been about this whole thing about July 1st of this year, we have to submit OASIS on all payers. And I think it's been kind of, I guess, amusing to me when you listen in on those calls and it's guaranteed somebody's going to say, well, what about this payer? What about self-pay? What about this other payer? And you kind of get the impression that CMS just keeps saying all payers. The word all means all. It didn't change the ones that are excluded right now, which is the under 18 and the pregnancy ones. That's not changing. It didn't change those requirements. It was only about payer. So I think many of us go, okay, I get it. All payer starts July 1. We could voluntarily submit some in the beginning of the year. So the first 6 months, you could possibly be submitting things voluntarily right now. There were a couple glitches. We heard from agencies early on in January that they went ahead and started voluntarily submitting and things were getting kicked back and that wasn't working quite right. But I think there's a piece within question 2 that I want to make sure we're all on the same page about. So we see that the question talks about during the phase-in for the transition of mandatory OASIS data collection. It talks about, okay, I can do it voluntarily now. Then what happens July 1st? And I think this is something I'm not hearing enough discussion about because in their answer, the bottom line is that voluntary submission period is exclusively with starts of care from January 1 till the end of June. So if you had a patient prior to that had started care with you prior to January 1, their start of care is outside the window. These are not expected to be submitted. And some of you reached out to me when you found this out because your EMR wouldn't let you do it. You had done a start of care in November, you tried to do a recert in January, it kicked it out saying, I don't have a corresponding start of care. Good, I'm glad it did that to you because those don't apply. But what if I have a start of care today in February and we're going to approach July? Note in the answer, any subsequent assessments past July are still voluntary. Now that's something I wouldn't have thought of. You would have thought, okay, voluntary means start, we're practicing, and then it all goes to mandatory in July. What goes mandatory in July begins with starts of care that are July 1 and later. If you're submitting voluntary now on starts of care and it's been flowing and it's working in your EMR, those are still considered voluntary after July 1st. I think it's an interesting piece of information that may make me go, well, then why would I do it if it's always voluntary? I don't know, but we want to make sure we understand those parameters clearly. Speaking of understanding parameters, this is a question I think is important to remind our clinicians about periodically because it can be very tempting with certain OASIS questions, height, weight, functional status. Hey, I saw therapy notes from the hospital. I see wound descriptions from when they were in the nursing home. Can I just use that? And they reiterate again, the expectation of what we're gathering for assessment information actually comes from direct interaction between us and the patient. Now, I'm not saying we completely ignore stuff that we saw, but we can't use that as source documents. And I worry periodically, especially as we do chart auditing and outsourcing stuff here at K&K, that I sometimes peek to look at height and weight and see what was on the hospital stuff. And you sometimes start to notice a lot of matching. Now, is it possible they weigh exactly the same? Yeah, there's a chance that's true. But we want to make sure as a clinician, we're not seeing this as a time-saving strategy, that I can just do this, pull it over, and then I don't have to worry about it. We are expected to be assessing the patient ourselves for purposes of getting accurate data. On to the OASIS knowledge assessment. Now, my vision for this, for club members in our future meetings, is that about a couple of weeks before our meeting, you're going to get an email with a link that will take you to the 5 scenarios for that particular month's call. And that way you can answer those questions. Can I make you? No, but the value in you doing that, and it's completely online. You don't have to download anything. You pick your answers. It will tell you what your score is when you're done. But what I want to do with it is be able to take the results to guide our conversation on that call. So if it's something everybody who participated got it right, we probably aren't going to spend a whole lot of time on it other than maybe a little tips. But if people were getting it wrong or a lot of people got it wrong, then it's something we need to talk about. Again, my vision with our knowledge assessment products is to help us figure out what we know and what we don't know. And when we identify what we don't know, how do we close the gap? So since I didn't send it to this whole group ahead of time, and we knew people would be listening to an initial recorded version, I'm going to do it a little bit differently to illustrate the concept, but I think you'll understand what we're trying to do. So I'm going to read the question, and I'm going to give you a moment so you can pick what you think is the answer. Then we're going to move on and work the process. So specific to B1300 health literacy. When asked, how often do you need to have someone help you when you read instructions, pamphlets, or other written material from your doctor or pharmacy? The patient responds, that is not a problem for me. The patient's daughter disagrees and tells the clinician that she has to help them with this nearly every time they see the doctor. So what is the correct answer for health literacy? Is it never, rarely, sometimes, or often? Common scenario, I believe, is happening for our clinicians is that the patient is saying one thing and we have a reliable caregiver who's saying something else. The correct response is the never. And yes, the daughter's information is relevant, and it's definitely something I, as the clinician, would have to take into consideration in terms of how I'm going to proceed with my care plan and information I need to share with this patient. But in terms of accurate data reporting, I have to choose what the patient gave me. What we also do with these knowledge assessments is provide the rationale. I think that's an important piece, to pull things from the guidance manual, to pull things from reputable CMS resources, to be able to show where this is coming from. Because do I think that's the best possible answer? No, I'd be more interested in the fact the daughter tells me this is a problem. But I'm not in a position to change the directions of the OASIS. This is where I tell people all the time, it's about making peace with the directions and ensuring that I'm following them. Giving yourself GERD because you don't like the fact that you have to put never is not really helping the big picture in terms of data accuracy. So let's try another one. And Sherry, I know we're recording. I'm just not sure what these blue lines are that are showing up on my screen. If you can take a look and figure out what that is, or unless just tell me I'm the only one seeing them and maybe it's already been a long day, but it seems to be continuing. But I can keep going and we can keep moving on. All right, 1850, transferring. The clinician arrives at the patient's home and finds him lying in bed. He needs a little help sitting up since his recent total knee replacement. Using a walker, he can walk to a bench at the end of the bed with occasional reminders from the clinician about walker placement and how to safely sit down. So what would be the best response to 1850 transferring? Is it 0, 1, 2, or 3? Well, you'll notice in these scenarios, sometimes I tend to write best response because I think sometimes when we make it the correct response, it kind of makes especially clinicians aggravated because sometimes they don't like their response option. So our best response following the guidance is in fact response 2. And in all of my years of being involved with education and auditing and all of that stuff, this seems to still be a sticking point with the clinician, because we still see struggling with the idea of someone or something, which is response 1. Someone and something drops you to response 2. I don't think we struggle when hands get put on the patient. Okay, we understand they're using a piece of equipment. It clearly says that, but it says that they gave reminders. That's where I think many clinicians get stuck. we don't see and don't even recognize the amount of supervision and verbal cue we instinctively provide during that assessment visit. Because I don't see discrepancies in the OASIS answer when there's hands. I do see it when there's safety concerns and there was a hovering element from the clinician who maybe never touched them, but that is considered assistance in OASIS. So we have the rationale there. All right, car transfer. Yep, it's a GG item. No, it is not part of value-based purchasing. It is just as important as every other GG item. We want to make sure we're getting it correctly. So to assess a car transfer, the clinician assists the patient into a wheelchair, pushes them to the car door, and must open the door for them. The patient can get in the car with verbal cues for sequencing and where to place their hands. Assistance is needed with seatbelt management. Verbal cues are needed when exiting the car, and assistance provided to get back to the house. All right, that's a very comprehensive description of what's going on with this individual. What do we think is the best response for them? 6, 5, 4, or 3? Right. Supervision or touching assistance? Wait a minute. This sounds like a whole lot more than that because we got him in a wheelchair, we're pushing him into the car, we're opening the door, we got to get him back to the house. Yep. But the guidance is very clear that it is only about getting into and out of the vehicle. Opening the car door, the other stuff you see in the rationale description is excluded. And this is why attention to detail is so important. Because I fully appreciate, regardless of discipline, when you as a clinician go, that's dumb. What do you say? Just the transfer, like they floated to the car and floated back to the house? Again, discipline, neutral data collection. The GGs are the exact same questions that we find in the assessment tools for skilled nursing facilities, for inpatient rehab, and a limited number of them are also present for the long-term acute care hospitals. So data integrity is critical. All of us in all of those settings have to be looking at it the same way. So yes, do I clinically think that it's still relevant about the wheelchair and the door opening and all the rest of it? Absolutely. Is it possible that if working on a car transfer is going to be part of my plan as a therapist, I'm going to dig into the rest of this? Yes. But none of that, which is all wonderful, good clinical stuff, changes how I collect data. I have to make sure I understand that this is talking about a very specific piece of the overall concept of a car transfer. Now, feeding and eating. While discussing nutritional issues, the patient mentions that they used to be able to make themselves small meals and snacks, but since returning from the hospital, their spouse has taken over food preparation. Due to significant balance issues, the patient is using a walker and is not able to transport food to a dining table without assistance. Once seated at the table and the food placed in front of them, they can cut items, pour drinks, and feed themselves safely without assistance. The best response option to M1870 feeding or eating are what? 0, 1, 2, or 3? Okay, while you think about that for one more second, I'm going to see if I can figure out how to remove that line without too much distraction. So focus on that for just a bit.
Cindy, try to go to the bar at the top to the far right where the 3 dots are. Open it and disable annotation. And Ken Schumacher's on here as well. If you see that on your screen, go over to the 3 dots, drop it down, and you should see disable annotation.
It says I've disabled it, but it didn't remove it.
You can still see the screen, Cindy, just to give you some comfort.
Okay. Well, I don't want to take people's time with that. I will take this off of here. All right. We'll just pretend that they're little doodle lines, like one of the home care patient's grandkids got a hold of the paper while you were looked away and put some lines on it. It doesn't take away from this. And it speaks to how Club OASIS is going to have a degree of flexibility, which is critical to surviving working in the home health space at all. So where do we put this person with feeding and eating? Well, sometimes we got to go to a blast of the past. This individual is independently feeding themselves. Why did I pick this one? Well, I have some concerns about this item. When it got pulled into PDGM for reimbursement purposes, I noticed a distinct shift away from a lot of patients could in fact perform this task independently, and then all of a sudden nobody could. Those are the kind of data collection shifts CMS notices as well. So we can attribute some of it to maybe we pay better attention now, or maybe we revisited it, or we're thinking about it differently is one thing. But that kind of shift, whenever there's a payment or quality measure change, does tend to add fuel to the fire. So I want to remind folks that this is only about putting the food in your body once you're seated in front of it. I have done many variations of this in our OASIS knowledge assessment products, and a lot of clinicians still miss it. They try to add to it the fall risk, the mobility issue, the walker that can't carry the food. Much like car transfer, what they're measuring is a very specific piece of this task, which is why it constantly reinforces to me it's discipline neutral data collection. These are not therapy questions. These are not nursing questions. They are not clinical questions. They are data bites. We have to make sure that we're not creating the wrong response by adding things to it that don't belong there. Let's switch away from function to surgical wound. The patient is being admitted to home health after a short stay in a skilled nursing facility. 3 weeks ago, they had a total hip replacement. The staples were removed while in the SNF. The skin is completely epithelialized with no openings present. There is no dressing in place and no orders to provide wound care. The correct response to 1340, does this patient have a surgical wound, would be, is there a surgical wound or not? Oh, I do see the chat box. Yeah, it does kind of look like somebody's cat got a hold of it. Yes, as a fellow cat person, yeah, it does look a little cat scratchy. All right, what is the correct response to 1340? Yes, the patient has one observable surgical wound. Again, I use scenarios to remind us of those situations that can slip through the cracks. So it can seem like, based on this description as a clinician, it's completely epithelialized, we don't have wound care orders, there's no bandage on it, therefore there is no surgical wound. But we have to go back to the instructions. We know that this surgical wound was closed by primary intention. It talked about staples being removed in the SNF. Now, I know the official guidance doesn't say anything about the surgical date. I always do this. If I'm adding a spin or a thought or a tip to something, I'm going to be clear when it's a Cindy Craftism and not the guidance. But the guidance is clear about 30 days. That this has to be completely epithelialized for 30 days before it becomes a scar and is not reportable in OASIS. So the fact that the surgery was 3 weeks ago means we haven't hit 30 days since they had the surgery. There was no way we've hit 30 days of fully epithelialized. Therefore, it is still reportable, regardless of the fact we're not providing wound care with wound care orders, despite the fact it's not doing anything and there's no dressing on it. It could be argued that it is still relatively fresh, and you're going to want to keep an eye on that skin in case something were to go sideways. And I know there's clinicians going, but nothing's gonna based on your description, things perfectly fine. Take a breath. It's still reportable. So we don't want to cut those corners and say, well, since there's no dressing on it, it doesn't really count. It's not part of my plan of care. Discipline neutral data collection. If it's still reportable, we want to make sure it's ending up in that document. So that's the intent with those questions, is to send them out to club members ahead of time. So you can take your time, and I'm saying only 5. I'm not going to send like 25 or 50 and make everybody miserable. And if over time the group says, hey, I want a few more of those, we could talk about adding more, but really to help us shape a conversation. To say, okay, you answer them. How did I do? How did the group do? What's the rationale for those? Could I potentially take those and share those in my agency? Yes. But again, once we get to the pricing issue, we want to make sure that you can include as many people from your agency directly, because that if you take it to share it, only one person can take the test. If it is the group or a larger group of the clinicians, they could all take it and you could all see how you're doing in those particular areas. But knowledge of the guidance is one thing. I'm trying to get us unstuck from OASIS being an island. Now, I know I keep going with the beach theme. Yes, I really, really want to go spend some time on a beach soon. Maybe that's what's stuck in my head. But it's not an island. It's become something that the admitting clinician or the subsequent clinician sometimes feels like they got the short straw and they had to be the one to do it. Or you may have a model where specific clinicians have demonstrated expertise in this, so they get all of them or the majority of them. And they may not be as annoyed as some clinicians can be about filling this out. Great, but they're doing a task. And so this individual goes out and they know the drill. They need to complete this document. It needs to go through the review process. Then we sit and we wait. We see what comes back for corrections. Very often it's like, okay, fine, I agree, I agree. It's finally done. I relinquish responsibility. I move on. This goes back to how I was trained in OASIS when we were a pilot site, which basically was, here's the information Medicare wants, fill it out the best you can, and then go do patient care. But there's the problem. What do you mean, and then go do patient care? Because OASIS Island has created this idea that the job of this one clinician is to gather information, collect it, massage it, review it, get it out the door in pristine condition. And then I'm done. I'm done. I'm done unless I get stuck with a future time point or I'm another discipline and the rule is still in play right now that if nursing's ordered, they have to do the admit. So all the therapists rejoice. I am a therapist for full disclosure. Oh, yay, I don't have to do the admit. They had to do it because of the rules. It's not my problem unless I get stuck at the discharge. Okay, whoa, wait a minute. Yes, it's a single signature model, but the information collected is about our patient. And unless that admitting clinician is going to be the one who delivers every single visit in between, the rest of the team needs to know what these responses are and how these responses influence care delivery with intentionality. So when agencies reach out to us and they're not happy with their star ratings or they don't like where it's going in value-based purchasing, it must be an OASIS accuracy problem. OASIS inaccuracy directly contributes to that. No doubt in my mind, if that information is being collected wrong, it's tainting your outcome results. But in and of itself, it doesn't make outcomes happen. All it does is measure them. So I like to use this analogy, and I apologize to those of you who may have heard it before, but this is really along the lines of if I am trying to do something about my weight, I need to have a reliable scale. I need to know that when I step on that scale, every time I step on it, I'm confident it's giving me an accurate number. If the scale is broken to begin with, this is not going to work. I'm going to get all kinds of wonky numbers and it's going to be a mess. So I have to make sure my scale works. So I get on my scale today and I write down the number. 2 weeks from now, I get on it again. I don't like the number. Now, it's very easy to say, scale broke. I don't like the scale. Kick the scale, throw the scale against the wall. I don't like it. But the reality is, the number I see now is a direct result of the decisions I made over the last 2 weeks, not the scale in and of itself. So how do we help the team get away from this, just run the gauntlet when your name has to be on it, and think about the information, although again, discipline neutral data collection, incomplete thoughts, does need to shape how we're going to plan care for this individual with intentionality. And some of those things that we collect information on that we can't fix do change many aspects of how we're going to provide care. So I didn't want to pick more discussion of function. No, I didn't pick GGs, okay? I want to talk about use of proxy in our example session today. So the way we lay this out is we're going to pick some items. Today we picked, I believe, 3. We're going to talk about, tips around the item, but then take it further. What are the clinical implications of this? What are the documentation strategies about this? What are those things we have to pay attention to downstream? So it's not about just check the right box and yay, the reviewer didn't send it back to me, so I did a good job, but what am I going to do with that information? So in terms of proxy, yes or no, when it comes to the race question, can I, as the data collector, use a proxy? Well, when it comes to any question where the possibility is a proxy, there's a little bit of a tell in the items themselves. If there's a proxy option, you can also see it has check all that apply. So in other words, in a situation where I find out that a patient is unable to respond, then the directions do tell me that I can use a proxy or I can use medical record information. We know that when it's the patient declines to respond, all bets are off. If the patient is telling you, I'm not answering that question, period, even if the daughter tells you, the neighbor tells you, and the medical record tells you, you can't use that to take over the response. The patient has the right to decline. The other piece we got to think about with these questions is this is how the patient identifies. In other words, I have to ask the patient the question. One of the biggest conversion issues when we went to OASIS E was the sheer number of questions that are interview questions, not suggested interview questions. The guidance says to ask the question, present the response options, and the patient either responds, declines, or is unable. That's it. So when I start digging in with some agencies and they look at, oh, it takes so long to do an admission, and then you break it down and the clinician is in the home for 58 minutes and filling out paperwork for over 100, my question is, are you actually doing the interview you're supposed to be doing? And in doing a lot of education when we went to E, I don't understand why there was pushback about the interview questions. They're easier than the other assessment questions. Ask the question, here's the response options, boom. I got to pay attention, proxy or no proxy, did you decline? This is scripted. So you say, wait a minute though, why are we talking about this? Because care planning, but I don't know where Cindy Craft's going with this. Okay, so let's look at a little question here. During the admission visit, the patient is unable to respond when asked about their race. The patient lives alone, so there is no one else available to provide information, but the clinician clearly observes that the patient is white. So what is the correct response to A1010 race?
Cindy, while they are contemplating this question, I
Yes.
want you to go to the same 3 dots,
Okay.
go to more.
I
And
don't
you'll
have
see something
more.
that says clear all annotations.
Can you do that from your side? Because my more does not have that. It has enable annotation for others, hide names of annotators, but I don't have, there's nothing in the drop down more.
Let me share my screen real quick and we'll come right back.
Okay. I don't see the line, Sherry. Can I just go back to sharing mine?
Yes.
Perfect. Nope, not that one. My apologies.
Mhm. We briefly took the slides down, everyone, so that we could try and clear the scribbling.
We need some theme music so people can keep thinking about that. Oh, because it also kicked me right out of my screen. Okay. Are we back? Yes? Sherry?
No scribbles, yay.
Okay. All right. I'm gonna again, I'm gonna apologize for that little technical weirdness to those participating today and the recorded version. Let's just keep moving forward. All right. So what did you pick for your response here? Patient unable to respond as the only response. Now, many of you may say, yeah, I got it right. Still don't understand why she spent time on that question. I've used proxy-related questions like this in numerous versions of our OASIS knowledge assessments, and I'm concerned with the number of clinicians that are telling me the correct response is D, both A and B. What I've unearthed is that it appears that at least some clinicians believe that they are a proxy. So that in those questions that allow a proxy to participate, they think it's them. The thing that concerns me about that as a reviewer, I would have no way of knowing that when I'm reviewing their OASIS document. None. Because in good faith, I would know that it's been explained what a proxy is and when you can use it in the educational process. And the alternative of having them document exactly who they talk to and what they talk, I mean, it's going to turn the documentation into War and Peace and probably make them get really angry at us. So we've looked at it and said, I think everyone knows what this means. What I'm finding with this is maybe they don't. And so we're periodically going to have to go back and make sure things like the proxy, things like what is continuous oxygen is defined in OASIS. Because I know what the word continuous means, but we know that it defines it in OASIS as 14 hours or more. Well, 14 out of 24 is not continuous. I know, have your moment, that's annoying. And many of us who don't hate the OASIS and have been accused of sleeping with it under our pillow know that. But I'm finding through this testing model that there are clinicians that don't. And as a reviewer, I don't know how I would catch that. So we have to make sure we're doing reminders, not just about GG questions or functional questions or wound questions, but these key concepts like you are not one of the proxy people. You don't meet that criteria yourself. Your observations, although valid, I'm not taking that from you, you don't get to use them in situations where the patient is unable to respond. Can we use a proxy when we're doing the PHQ 2 to 9? Well, what I do like that they did when we went to OASIS E1 is reconfigure some of the instructions. I think some of those, what to do when to skip here, what to put with that, was buried in the manual, which is okay, but we know that that's not necessarily readily accessible. And sometimes we don't use the feature like we should in our EMR to click at that and dig out some of those pieces. So I'm glad to see they pulled some of it there. But I think what happened with this is the PHQ 2 to 9 has been around for a while. I think the move to the 9 was better than when we had the 2, when we just had the 2 questions. But my issue is this. If I've administered this, following all the rules that go with it, and I find an issue, what am I doing about it? And I'm not talking about clicking depression on the care plan so it generates 900 interventions and goals. What does this mean with respect to how I'm delivering care? Is this something that is going to be a factor in terms of I don't want to overwhelm them with the information. So if we take a result here that indicates there's an issue, and I have a patient with several new diagnoses and a lot of information that they're going to have to absorb, and they're anxious about being home from the hospital, is this going to alter how I'm going to educate? And does the rest of the team need to know this as well? Because this could be a potential issue for them. And we don't want to say, okay, well, I'm going to slow my roll a bit and stagger the education a bit so that it's more palatable for this individual. And then they also have 3 other services, and we're all still by volume overwhelming them. Why do I make up this point? Because we have for years gone to CMS and said patients with cognitive and behavioral issues are harder for us to manage, and we think we should be paid more. However you want to configure it, PPS or PDGM, there's got to be something in there. There's got to be more weight for cognitive behavioral stuff. Having participated in several technical expert panels over the years, what's been interesting is to see OASIS data as CMS sees it. So what they've looked at in the past are cognitive behavioral issues noted for patients against utilization. With the idea being, if this patient is harder to care for, then that would be manifested in a higher acuity and more visits. Because if you're having to provide more care, the way we provide care is by making visits to the patient. And so this person would either need more visits compared to patients that don't have these issues, or they would have more disciplines potentially than someone who doesn't have these issues. And historically, our data has not backed up what we try to say. What they see is our cost based on visits and disciplines doesn't really look any different for patients with or without depression, with or without anxiety, with or without dementia, with or without confusion. So I think this is where the rubber meets the road in care planning. So I am not saying this particular OASIS item has a particular cutoff and you should do X number of visits based on. No. But if I've used this tool as intended and I've identified an issue, or potentially I think that the patient downplayed their answer. So they keep telling me everything's great. I stopped after A and B because I'm following the directions and the patient says they're fine. But the daughter's like, listen, this is a big deal and this is going on and that's going on and people are crying, but the patient sticks by their responses. I have to report it the way they told me, but I'm obligated to document the rest of the stuff I learned. And if that is going to alter how I'm going to approach the care, it's different for this patient. Okay, take 2 patients that have diabetes and one has depression. Is my approach going to have to be any different? Do you see evidence of that in your care plan? Do you see evidence of that in the actual execution on the visits? Because I see at times, yes, there's clearly an identified issue here. And that's all it's mentioned. It's noted with some goals and interventions because somebody said you had to do that in the care plan. But then you read the visit notes and there's no mention. There's no discussion. There's no commentary. There's no observation. There's no how we're managing it. It's just not there. Which begs the question, what are we doing with this? And that's where I think OASIS Island has made it be, I only have to deal with this when you make me. Which brings me to the next question about proxy. Social isolation. It's another interview question. I have to ask it exactly as written. So I cannot fill it out 8 o'clock at night and guess at the answer. I need to ask them, how often do you feel lonely or isolated from those around you? Now, I said before, the tell about a proxy is if you can put more than one answer. And here you cannot. So that tells us right from the jump that if the patient is unable to respond, that is the only answer that goes in there. Obviously, if they decline to respond. But we're back against the, what if the patient tells us something that we don't necessarily think is accurate, or a caregiver says this isn't accurate? Doesn't matter. We got to put in what the patient says. But why are we bothering to collect information about social isolation? It's a great question because it gets at some of these social determinants of health, and this is where we expect to see expansion of data collection in 27 around social determinants of health. But we have this question now. The issue is, why does this person feel that way? And the manual goes on to say, you cannot make assumptions. You cannot say that someone lives in a rural area means they're socially isolated. This is patient perception. Okay, fine, but what can we do about it? Well, clinically, there are some things we could do about it. One contributor to this feeling isolated is self-isolation because the patient has had a medical event and they're uncomfortable with people being around them. Very often because their appearance is not what they would want it to be. Okay, hospital hair, can't wear the clothes I usually wear. I got this wound. I'm trying to, I'm not, I don't want people around me. I don't want people to see me. I'm no, 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 no. Have we ever thought about the role of OT in helping to address this issue? No, no, no. See, OT goes out there and does dressing and bathing. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I know, and dressing and bathing and all that's measured in the 1800s in the GGs, and some of it gets us stars but wait a second. Have we ever considered enhancing our documentation in terms of relevance to the patient of, for some of them, this can directly help to alleviate social isolation. If they can get their hair combed the way they want it, if they can get their clothes on the way they want it, they would be more likely, and we don't assume that, this is conversation with the patient, to be more open to interacting with other people and alleviate this feeling lonely or isolated. So it's taking a piece of information. Maybe you wouldn't have worded it that way. You don't really like the response options. You don't like the whole thing, proxy, no proxy, whatever. The question exists and we have to answer it. But it's an interesting piece of information to not just get right and pass the reviewer, but how does that affect our care planning? Are we thinking about, are there things that could help alleviate it? If their mobility was better and they're no longer homebound and they graduate from us, that right there could help with this. Some people do not want to be homebound. They do not want to be stuck in their house. By virtue of what's been going on with them, that's the state they're in. Improving those things, managing that wound, all of that could have a tie in here. So it's thinking bigger than just make me answer a question, but what do I need to consider in terms of my decisioning about how I view what I'm doing from a different perspective, and not just in the questions that cause the stars to happen, but how can I then take this issue and make a meaningful difference for my patient? So that was just a sample of that portion that I want to build in on our club meetings to really pick items based again on what we're hearing from club members, what we're seeing from our outsourced products, all of those things to say, what are some of those questions we want to make sure people pay attention to, or people think differently about in terms of what does this make me do in terms of actual care delivery? And how is my team valuing that information? The individuals all caring for this patient, not just the person who had to sign that form. The fourth part of the club meeting is open QA. So we did the CMS Q&A at the beginning. We want to have an open Q&A time. And Sherry has reminded me as we build these sessions going forward that I have to watch my time to make sure there's enough for Q&A, because I can get a little excited on these topics and then you throw in a technical blue squiggle and it can make the timeline come up a little bit. But we want to make sure there's attention to this. So we want to do some of that today. Now, if your question is about pricing or technical, hold your horses. We got slides coming to explain how that works. But about what we talked about so far, the idea, does it sound interesting? Sherry, I know you're monitoring the chat box, and I've been pushing too many buttons that I would have to go back and find my chat box. But do we have any thoughts in there that would fit for our open Q&A point?
Indeed, we do, Cindy Craft. We have a few questions from our listeners and from our folks that decided to join us today. The first one is the most obvious one, and I think it checked off the middle square of my bingo card. Can we share the slides? I want to share with the listener wants to share with the home health leaders for consideration of participation in the OASIS club, in Club OASIS. Can you explain about what's going to happen with the slides?
Well, the slides today, Sherry, I fully intend for you to share them. We want to get this information as far and wide as possible to see what the interest is. And if you share that with your organization and they go, yeah, not so sure, I'd want to see something else, we want that feedback as well. This is really meant to be useful to people. And so if it was me and I was trying to explain to somebody, yeah, the video is one thing, but being able to share the slide information, absolutely, Sherry, I'm fine with that.
And someone agreed with you on here that the confusion with the OASIS collection is that some are self-reported and some are from a variety of sources. And so one of the questions that I thought was super interesting, and I'm going to try to get to all of them. How do you answer these questions that only the patient can answer when the patient is constantly confused? Do you answer as patient unable to respond, since the patient would not understand the questions and answers? And someone wrote underneath that, if they bomb the BIMS, I tell the staff to choose unable to respond, but not sure if that was correct. And they're really interested in knowing your take on that, Cindy.
Well, first of all, I am very glad that someone contextualized it as bombed the bins because we still see, and I can't believe we're this far into it, confusion that when you're that very first question for the BIMS, the only time that you put no is when the patient is totally unable to be understood. That we have done everything in our power to understand their communication, writing, gestures, the whole bit, cannot understand what they're trying to say. So continuing with the BIMS would be unfair because we can't get the information. It is not, I think the patient doesn't need it, the patient didn't want to do it, the patient got annoyed with me. No, 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 no. I have to put yes in those situations and deal with the rest of the questions, which I think does a much better job of identifying true problems. So when someone has done it and bombed it, I would say it depends in what areas and to what extent. So when we think about that unable to respond, if I am trying everything I can to explain the question to the patient and they're not getting it, okay, that I'm saying, what is your pain level? And they're talking about this bird out the window, and then you're trying to explain, and they keep talking about total stuff that's irrelevant. We would also be capturing in another question. But yes, I would say unable to respond is an appropriate response. But again, it's really one of those where we need to make every effort and that it's clear whenever we choose an unable to respond or unable to participate, it's the patient's inability, not that we didn't think it needed to be done or the patient didn't want to. That's not the same thing.
Okay, people are telling me that I'm quiet, Cindy. I turned my mic up, and I'm just relishing the fact that folks called me quiet, because that's something I've probably never heard in my life. Is that
Yes, highly unusual.
I hope you, please let me know that you can hear me better, but this is the next question. For the previous question, A1010, the OASIS Answers course says that in the case where the patient is unable to respond, you would code unable to respond plus what you find by proxy. If the patient declines to respond, only score that answer. Is that different than what you were saying? If so, can you verify, can you justify or
Well,
clarify that?
it's what I'm saying, but it's a step, it matches exactly, but you catch what it said, that you can use a proxy. What I'm finding out through our testing is clinicians think they are the proxy. So in the example I gave, and that's why we're going to send the handout so people have it in writing as well, that in my example, nobody was there with the patient and the medical record did not confirm race. The clinician observed the patient to be white. And I'm finding the clinicians putting down unable to respond and white. You're not the patient's proxy. So we want to be very careful with that in terms of making sure that the proxy definition is what the clinician understands. Because if it really was, I could just, in those cases, put down my own observations, then I'm inserting myself into the question inappropriately. So is it probably an unusual circumstance that the patient is unable to respond and completely alone and the medical record didn't help me? Yeah, I think more often than not, we do find information through the appropriate way. But the purpose of that scenario was to remind us, hey, I need to check in with my clinicians once in a while that they have not gone down a path where they think they're the proxy, or the path where they've decided that continuous oxygen is 24/7, and so they're going to answer that way. They have to stay within the guardrails of the guidance.
Okay. So what software have you seen or observed that sets the clinician up for the most success in OASIS guidance, process, and accuracy?
Ooh, you
That
know,
is a loaded question, because we
well,
at K&K, we try to stay away from endorsing certain products unless we have been directly involved in the development of those products. Cindy, is that
well, I would say just, and I'm trying to watch the time. My Oasis journey started back in ye old days of pen and paper. And when the guidance manual was available, if you wanted to slaughter half a forest and print it all out in 8.5 by 11 sheets and poke holes in it, put it in a binder, and they wondered why clinicians didn't use it because it took up 90% of your bag just to carry the dumb thing around. And it wasn't like it was going to be user friendly. When you say what sets them up for success, I think the majority of EMRs have done a good job of making that information accessible within the program. So I can be trying to answer a question and there's an icon or a feature that I can utilize to give me that guidance right then. When I teach, I can always tell if it's a group who works in QA and who has been telling them about that feature and knows they don't use it. Because when I bring it up, then it's light bulbs. Oh, yeah, we should do that. I wonder if we have that. And you see smoke coming out the ears of QA. They're like, we told you it's there. I get equally frustrated because carrying around the giant book was one thing. You can click on it now, you should be using it. And if there's a specific EMR issue that doesn't have it, you can go straight to the CMS website, have that icon on your desktop, just like I do, and it's searchable PDF. You can get exactly to the question that you want. So to me, it's not about, do I have to make something fancier to get you to use it? You have access to the resources. I think part of the problem is it's too difficult, I can't understand them, or it's an easier relationship. Hey, Bo, I hear the squeaky. That if you create a situation where I sort of kind of guess, because I know you have reviewers that are going to fix it for me, and then all I have to do is agree. I think that's contributed to some of the inaccuracy as well, which is why I hit so hard on the guidance was written for the clinician. It was not written for special people. It was not written for reviewers. It was written for the clinician so that they would get it right the first time. I think we've made it overcomplicated, but I think some technology that I can just click it versus carry it everywhere has made it much more accessible. I just think they need more motivation to actually go look and not just guess.
Cindy, last question for time. Given what you've talked about regarding collaboration for the Start of Care OASIS, do you have a suggested protocol to get it completed most accurately?
So we know we have a 5-day window. And this is where, depending on what your role is in the organization, I either make people happy or I annoy people. It goes all over the place. So there's 5 days from that start of care to collect assessment information. That has never been about, I'll get to it when I get to it. I don't feel like filling the paperwork out today. OASIS is hard. I don't want to do it till tomorrow. It's not that. It is a 5-day opportunity to collect information. So if I go out on this admission visit and this individual is on the ball, I have a good caregiver confirming or refuting information, I have good referral information, it's a straightforward situation, I can likely get what I need to get an accurate assessment on that first visit. However, a lot of patients in home health are not like that. Either so much has to be done, not only am I doing the OASIS, but I'm trying to hook up an IV and I'm trying to get your medication straightened out and I have to do all of this other. It is way too much to do in one shot. I get what I need to get started and get you safely managed. I want to come back in the next day or two and collect the rest of the assessment information. I can do that. Or I'm a nurse and I'm doing this and I really want to talk to the therapist. I know they're going out tomorrow. I am not sure. I think I know where I want to land, but I need to talk to them. Then I talk to them tomorrow. We agree on an answer. And we know that those, I do it a day or two later, changes the M90 date. I think the cycle we've been in is we want to get it out the door. We want to get it out the door. So we tell the clinician, you got to get it in the day you do it or in 24 hours. You have to have it to me in 24 hours. I think that contributes to errors. Now, you may say, and I totally agree with you, that I have to have it because there's other clinicians that need to see this patient and clinically they need the rest of that assessment to do so. I agree. But have we set ourselves up in that 5-day window that do I know as the admitting clinician that I can turn in what I have for now, but if I go out the next day and find some other things, I know how to go in and correct it myself. Or listen, I am going to talk with therapy tomorrow. I will have it in tomorrow after I talk with them and we do this and we get it done and we update the 90-day. I think it's gone feast or famine. It's either we give them 5 days, and I hear agencies all the time say, well, my clinician doesn't turn it in for 10 days, 15 days. Okay, wait, we got big issues if you're going to take that long to turn it in. But I think sometimes the turn it in right away, I understand part of it, but have we also created the opportunity for the clinician to own, wait a minute, I figured out it's this, or I talked to the therapist and it's this, or the therapist talked to the nurse, wait a minute, now it's that. Where do I go in to make that correction? Or do I just go, oh, well, I guess the reviewer will find it and I'll deal with it later? Because that doesn't really get us where we need to be.
Okay, that's our last question. So let's move on to how do you join Club OASIS?
And I'm going to give Sherry may have come across to you as quiet today, but Sherry's fully responsible for this logo that took my, let's make a club and a beach, and we got palm trees and all kinds of good colorful stuff. So if you want to join us, we have the next few slides, and yes, you will also get this in the copy of the handout. Those of you who do the QR code thing, and this is a Sherry thing, I know my husband gets on me. I try to even get a menu at a restaurant and I mess it up. I take pictures of the crazy things, but we wanted to give people a variety of options. So if you want to join as an individual, the full year membership, $99. It's knocked off $20 between now and the 17th of March. Why the 17th of March? Because that is the unofficial anniversary of the creation of K&K, a special day near and dear to our heart. So we decided to leave this open up until the 17th of March. Now you say, well, wait a minute, I want more than one person. Well, it's not 1, 2, 3 times 99. If your group from your agency is 2 to 9 users, it's $199 total, not each, total. Again, $20 comes off of that if you do it between now and the 17th. I have a bigger group, 10 to 29, $299 total. 4 sessions for a year, up to 29 people participating, $299, that's it. It's not per user. And let's say you get inspired and you're going to bring all your clinicians in there, 30 or more users for a year, $399 total. So back to that beginning slide, Sherry and I really wanted to commit to K&K's mission of getting this information in the hands of the data collectors, or as close to that as humanly possible. It needs to be done in a concise session, in an interactive way, and the more the merrier. Because that's how we're, in my opinion, going to be able to make a change in how this works and how it feels. Because I can't be the only one who goes, 20 years of my life and it's the same, but the patient lives alone and the patient told me that they can do it. And surgical wound, I think that's wrong. I don't want to put not healing, and I don't want, it's like, it's been the same thing forever. How do we break the cycle and actually have it be integrated into what we do? Notice I'm not saying, ooh, I love it, I volunteer for all the admits, but can we at least stop making this such a negative process? Now, some of you may say QR code, no, that's not my thing. I agree with you. So we have other ways. Okay, if you want to go to our website and fill out a contact sheet, that would give us your name, your agency name, how many people that you would want to sign up for it, then you can deal with the invoice that way. If you have invoice related questions, technical questions, how does it get set up? How does it get set up to us get the test questions? I'm deferring those technical questions to Sherry. So you have her email address there. And if you have questions about content or suggestions for content, that's why you have my email address there. And again, so we framed it out with what we think those 4 parts would be and how much of each. But again, I want this to be a true club. So if it needs to shift, if we need to do something else, if something isn't working, this is going to evolve over time. And maybe after the first year, people say, well, every other month or once every 6 months. We want this to be something that is meaningful to participants, but also can be engaging. I do see, Sherry, there's some questions about CEUs for this. We have not.
I answered that question. We don't do CEUs only because on the therapy side of things, it's different for every state. Nursing is a little bit different, but we do recommend that any of the content that we provide, we price it at a level that is very reasonable for agencies. But we always recommend that you take the content and petition your board. We've never heard that anyone has been denied with any of our content that way. So that's what we would recommend for the club as well.
Sherry, I want to address 2 other questions that I see because I think they're important. There's a question about, do we have initial OASIS training options for clinicians new to OASIS? Yes, we do. I'm not giving up the soup to nuts. I'm just saying there's a place for that. And then we got to do something else. So if you're interested in additional training or more in-depth parts of it, please go to that knkhelp.com contact and fill out the form specifically what you're looking for, or you can just shoot me an email directly if you want. The other important question, Sherry, I don't know if you saw it, is does this mean our free Q&As are going away? No, Sherry would hurt me if I did something with those. We just want it because we saw so much of it being OASIS related. It's still great to have a free form. People submit questions the months in between and we engage during the session. We don't want to lose that. But I wanted to take some of the elements and see if we put a little bit more structure to it and educational feel to it, how that would work. So if you're already participating in our free Q&As, that's not changing. If you haven't and you want information, please feel free to reach out to Sherry. She can easily get you hooked up on that. They're available, I believe, Sherry, on our YouTube page as well, so are our free podcasts. So there's all kinds of free if you want to nose around in some of those. But no, we are not getting rid of the other Q&A.
And there's also a question about there being a private Facebook group to interact between sessions. The membership makes you a member of the community that is Club OASIS. And on there, you would be able to message back and forth, and it would be the platform where we house all the recordings for those that are members, and also have that ongoing chat and messaging for us to you regarding the club activities. So that's what your membership gets you as part of this. It's outside of Facebook. It's on a totally different platform that you can bookmark or put on your desktop and click on it. And it also has an app that's available with it that you can set for notifications if you want to, if you're having a conversation with someone. We did it away from the social media platforms because the social media platforms are a little bit of upheaval, and we wanted it to be something that was special for just our club. So I hope that answers that question.
Maybe it's in one of our initial club meetings, Sherry, we can come up with like a secret handshake or something like that for the club.
We come up with definitely a code word. We'll have to have a secret knock and have it be like
Yes.
old speakeasy downstairs with those, because I think that folks that love OASIS like you do, Cindy, probably need to dwell in a speakeasy somewhere.
Well, sometimes it's also that camaraderie of I haven't lost my mind. I'm not the I'm not the only one who's wanting to strangle people once in a while, or the clinician who's like, one reviewer tells me this, someone else tells me that. Oh my gosh, this is driving me crazy. I do think there's an element that will probably be support group like in this as well. But I know we need to adjourn. We went a little bit over, and I want to apologize again for the cat scratches thingies that ended up on the screen. And I look forward to your feedback, even if ultimately you choose not to. If you want to shoot me an email of what caused that or what made it, something that didn't fit for you, I'm always open to ideas. So thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to getting Club OASIS off the ground.